Hello, my name is Jarosław Dumanowski. I am historian, professor of early modern history working at Nicolaus Copernicus University in Torun. I work on the food history. My research consists in discovering, publishing, commenting old culinary texts and reminding forgotten culinary traditions, recipes, just describing an old culture, discussing, presenting different food customs. I am historian, but working from several years on the history of Polish or Central European or even European food. I started to work with cooks, food producers, people who own restaurants. Sometimes we organize some events in order to present this culinary past or to refresh modern Polish cuisine. Anyway, I started to feel a bit like, maybe not as a cook, more rather like a member of this culinary movement of people who are interested in food, in rediscovery of different traditions. So I would like to introduce you with my colleagues, with my friends, professional cooks, to Polish cuisine. Cuisine of one country is a very important way to discover its culture, its distinctiveness, its past and present. Cuisine is not only a food. Cuisine or cookery is a kind of art. It's a kind of quite more and more popular activity. It's a passion. In the modern world, where food habits are globalized, when different products come from all over the world, when you may find almost exactly the same dishes, the same products, moreover the same restaurants and bars, it become even more and more important that one country or group of people is able to preserve its traditional food, and more people start to rediscover this something traditional in the domain of food. What does it mean traditional? It may come from one or two past generations, or it may come from hundreds of years ago. Food traditions consist in modern, nowadays activity that it's rooted in the past, that it's rooted in some values. So I would like rather to talk about this part of Polish cuisine, about this specific branch of Polish food that is different from this global, quite well-known model of pizzas, fast food, or simplified Italian food, or some very well-known, very popular global products. I would like to introduce you just to prepare one chosen Polish meat. Of course, it would be a task of my friends, professional cooks, but also to some. I would like also to introduce you to a kind of discovery of Polish cuisine. What does it mean, Polish cuisine? What are the most recognizable Polish foodstuffs and dishes. What does it mean, Polish taste? Whether it is possible to answer these questions, because it's not so simple. Among different Poles, among different regions, among partisans of different kinds of cuisine or different waves, fashions, there are still quite harsh discussions. What is Polish cuisine? Nevertheless, we may state that there is some specific values or some specific traits of this Polishness in the domain of food. And very often we Poles, we are able to discover it observing the reactions or behavior of visitors from different countries or different continents. When they find some foodstuffs, some traditions, some tastes as original, as completely new for them, as valuable, as referring to something important to them. For example, in Polish cuisine, that is of course a part of the bigger European food culture, and especially strongly connected with the food and culinary patterns in Central and Eastern Europe. For most of people coming to Poland, one of the first discoveries is the omnipresence of the acid taste that people in Poland like very much. Different foodstuffs, products, and especially already prepared dishes that are acid, that have really strong acid taste. It's due to tradition, to our memory of familial cuisine, to our remembrance of the past, not so much in historical sense, as I work on the text from hundreds of years ago, but as a culinary past coming from the kitchen of grandma or mom or our childhood, for example. So this acid taste comes first of all from the processes of fermentation. It's a kind of heritage of history, because it's a technique, it's a preparation that it's really not very popular in Southern Europe or in different southern countries. In the same time, in northern and eastern countries, fermentation, so the art of preserving food, especially vegetables, sometimes also fruits, sometimes also other foodstuffs, was very appreciated, because in this old traditional way of preparing food, you had a big problem how to preserve food during the long and severe winter. Nowadays, this fermentation technique is rather, if we take the goals of preservation, it's not really necessary. But we are so even addicted to this art, to this taste, to these products, that we really love it, and it's still very popular. For example, maybe one of the most popular Polish foodstuff is fermented cabbage. Sauerkraut, if we use a German term, it's also a lesson for us. So sauerkraut, fermented acid cabbage, it's something that it's known in Germany, something that it's known even in eastern France. In Alsace they got szukut, so a kind of sauerkraut. In Polish it's kiszona kapusta. Maybe it's really necessary in order to discover Polish food, in order to really know what does it mean to understand, to learn some basic culinary terms. So kiszona kapusta, it's fermented cabbage. It's a foodstuff, it's a product, very acid and really very healthy. From one hand, it's very traditional, it's very old, it comes from these old times when you really had to do it in order to have something to eat in the end of winter and in the springtime. But it's also a basis for very important Polish dishes. Maybe the most famous, maybe the most recognizable dish prepared on the basis of this fermented cabbage is bigos. Is a kind of stew, a kind of one-pot preparation where you put this fermented cabbage and different pieces of meat, and especially some smoked meat and ham or bacon rather, or sausages, and you may add literally everything, or maybe not everything, but very different foodstuffs, like for example mushrooms, like for example a bit of wine, like dried fruit. It depends really on the family, it depends on the recipe, it depends on the tradition. Anyway, this bigos is maybe, it's sure that it's among one of the most famous Polish dishes, but this fermented cabbage is used for many goals, for many different preparations. For example, for soup on the basis of fermented cabbage, or fermented cabbage, acid cabbage soup, called in Polish kapuśniak. If you still remember, kiszona kapusta means fermented cabbage. Kapuśniak, it's a soup on fermented cabbage. So Polish soups are really an essential branch of Polish cuisine. I will present it a bit later, commenting the preparation of our cooks, the proposed meal done by them. But this fermented cabbage is also used for another very specific, very traditional, very recognizable and famous Polish dish, pierogi. Pierogi, it means in Polish dumplings, a preparation famous in different countries of Central and Eastern Europe, especially in Poland, in Ukraine, in Russia, in Belarus, in Lithuania. They are a bit different, or sometimes very different, in all these countries. In Poland, they are a bit like Italian ravioli, however a bit different, a bit like Chinese dumplings, a bit like Japanese dumplings, but they are the gyoza dumplings, but they are really different. They are boiled in the water and filled with many, sometimes fantastic, sometimes very different fillings. This filling of fermented cabbage is among one of the most popular, among popular among not only cooks but also in restaurants and bars. So you got bigos and dumplings, and very often fermented cabbage is used like an essential part of fresh salad, or it's used for braised cabbage, like a kind of side dish to different meats or vegetables or for vegan food also. So I still discuss only one issue, the fermentation. So important, so popular because of, for example, fermented cucumbers. The acid cucumbers, it was also a way to preserve the vegetables during the winter, but it's really much more popular in Poland than the fresh cucumbers. It's also used for preparing a soup. We prepared it with our cooks last year, in this similar film, in this similar lecture about the Polish food, Polish cuisine. And very often it's a kind of salad or vegetable proposed for sandwiches, for different meats, or like a side dish, something extremely popular. In Polish tradition, you may, or you rather might, in the past, ferment literally everything. Nowadays it's just a kind of relic, but from another hand, fermentation became, in last years, quite popular new culinary fashion. Because of the discovery of healthy impact of fermented food, many people in different countries, many cooks, many passioners of healthy food, of cuisine, start to experimentate with fermented food, wanting to ferment literally everything. And studying Polish cuisine, you may obtain some answers, some help, some advices. I've already mentioned smoked sausages. Smoked sausages used, for example, as a ingredient of this famous bigos, so this stew on the basis of fermented cabbage or mixed fermented and fresh cabbage, with many different additions, especially meats and sausage, is also a very common, popular, and really very even loved part of Polish culinary tradition. So it's not only the sausage, but the kind of taste, or rather flavor, of smoked food, of smoked ham, of smoked bacon, of smoked sausages. It's strongly associated in our history, in our culture, with feast, with celebration, with festivity. For example, the Easter time, one of the biggest Polish religious holidays, one of the biggest culinary tradition. This smoked meat, smoked sausage, smoked ham play an essential role because of the... So nowadays it's rather forgotten, not products. Products are still very popular. If people in Poland prepare sandwiches, they prepare sandwiches with smoked ham or smoked sausages. And this flavor of smoked things, it's so popular that people in Poland started to smoke very different things. They are lovers of sometimes surprising fermented food, and they are lovers of sometimes really surprising smoked food. Poles appreciate very much different kinds of smoked food. So it's a tradition, it's a kind of very popular foodstuff in Poland, so there are many famous producers, big industrial producers, but also still many artisanal masters who are able to prepare sausages like dozens or even hundreds years ago. And it's a very good example how the history, how culture influence cuisine, how cuisine may be a part of food habits, maybe a part of culture. What does it mean? In this case, there is a strong association between the smoked flavor, between the flavor of smoke, of something dried and smoked and mixed with the meat and different very specific spices. This flavor was remembered as a sign of the feast of festivity. For example, during the Easter, still in our times nowadays, one of the most popular products of this Easter Catholic celebration are smoked ham and different kinds of sausages, because during the history it was very difficult, hundreds years ago, to obtain fresh meat in the spring. Easter is of course a religious celebration, but it's also a kind of very old celebration of the spring. And this traditional food production system, you obtained the big portions of meat only in autumn, and in order to preserve it, you had to salt the meat, you had to dry the meat, and you had to smoke the meat. So the smoked meat had to wait during few months, and especially it was strictly forbidden to eat meat during the time of Lent. So Catholic, it's a very old, coming from medieval times, Catholic custom to abstain from meat and animal products during 40 days before Easter. It's a custom of fasting, and this special moment of fasting is called Lent. So nowadays it's not really very respected, but this association between smoked meat, sausages and ham, and Easter celebration and pleasure still persists. So we can talk about the history of specific dishes. I would like only to mention some specific treats. For example, Poles still love some wild food. Of course, it's a relic. From one hand, you have this very new, very modern fashion to discover wild herbs, wild vegetables, wild fruit. But from another hand, there is at least one very distinctive trait of Polish cuisine, or even Polish national character. It's the love of mushrooms. Mushrooms, wild forest mushrooms, I mean, are really a kind of national sport, object of passion, especially in September. You may see in Poland thousands of people really invading forests. Forests in Poland are open for public, for people, and the right to collect mushrooms is perceived as an essential civic right, like a right to obtain fermented food or right to eat smoked sausages. And mushrooms, once again I repeat, wild forest mushrooms are very important for very different Polish dishes. For example, there are specific dumplings, pierogi, filled with mushrooms. Mushrooms were very often dried. It's maybe more specific Polish tradition. White mushroom has a very strong flavor. It is used as, or was used, and still is used as a, not only as a filling or addition for many different foodstuffs, for many different dishes, but also as a kind of spice, as a kind of flavor addition. For example, very often mushrooms are really necessary ingredient of bigos. There are many kinds of mushroom soups. Soups are so important, but in order to present you Polish cuisine, I think it's enough to speak on this general shape of Polish cuisine, of different traditions, of some attitudes or really beloved products. It would be maybe wiser to choose some dishes composing a whole big meal, maybe a bit bigger than we used to eat nowadays during the week, and to commend the work of professional cooks that, and once again, try to search for these treats of specific Polish cuisine. I would like to present you an example of the Polish meal, maybe a bit more nutritious, maybe a bit richer than usual, just in order to present you a little more examples, a little more dishes than we used to eat every day. Anyway, the typical a pattern of Polish traditional meal foresees a meal composed of several servings, of several dishes. First of all, very important, maybe the most important in the Polish tradition is soup. Soup, rather soup in traditional Polish cuisine, rather soup than starter, opens a traditional, a Polish dinner or lunch or something between lunch or dinner, because the hour of eating is different than in many other countries. So first of all soup, then a main dish, very often meat or dumplings or some vegetables, and then some dessert. In our example, we would like to propose you first of all a soup, żurek. It's really difficult to translate because it's a very specific dish. Żurek, it's mean a soup of fermented, once again, something fermented. Fermented rye, fermented dough, fermented corn. It's very specific, very traditional, and still very, very popular. Then as a main dish, as a meat, we would like to propose you so-called zrazy. We may just describe it as meat rolls or rolled meat filled with something, with some flavoring additives. And then we would like to propose you something very simple, really a proposal for everyday student diet, so rice with vegetables, at the same time something without meat, some example of vegan food, and as a dessert, so it's called in Polish pieróg, but it's really different from typical Polish dumplings. It's a kind of pasty or pastry filled with apple. Apple is very important in Polish tradition, in Polish cuisine. We are very big, very important producer of apples, and Polish cook are able to transform apples in literally everything or many tasty things. So once again, the sour soup called żurek, then zrazy, rolled meat, and something maybe a bit more classical but very practical, very easy, quite easy and simple. So rice with vegetables and this pastry filled with apple. So we start our culinary presentation, our practical lesson of Polish cuisine with a soup. According to rules of Polish cuisine, a main meal of the day, should always or should rather start with a soup. Quite often, this everyday meal is considered, it starts with a soup and it ends with a soup, because soup plays an essential role in Polish food habits. It's not just a starter, it's not just a kind of starter that replaces salad or some cold meats or some appetizers. It's a very rich, quite complex and nutritious preparation. I discovered it due to my students coming from different countries, because according to me, according an inner observer, it was something obvious, something normal, something so general and evident that I, like many of Poles, never recognized, never discovered that it's something specific. So Polish soups are so important, and for example in different West Polish cities situated close to German border, many bars or restaurants propose these rich Polish soups are Polish specialty. Before commenting, before presenting you this culinary demonstration, just few words on the soups in general. We will start with żurek, this sour soup made on the basis of fermented rye or fermented dough or fermented corn. Corn, I mean, I don't mean the maize, American corn, but just rye or wheat. Żurek, it's a very good example of this richness, of this specialization in the soups. Żurek is among most popular Polish soup, but you can find among them, for example, beet soup, red beet soup, called in Polish or in different Slavonic languages borscht. It's quite complex preparation with many different kinds of borscht. It may be really quite light soup, even just a juice or really kind of beverage, or very complex, very rich and nutritious meal with many different vegetables and meats. Another kind of Polish popular soup is a barley soup, so a kind of soup prepared on the basis of meat, different vegetables and barley, so a grain popular in Poland. I already mentioned a soup on the basis of fermented cabbage, kapuśniak, or fermented cucumber, so it's pickled soup or pickled cucumber soup or gherkin soup, also very popular. Quite popular is also tomato soup, a bit different than this very well-known Italian pattern. And really many soups, among them fruit soup, among them a broth or kind of chicken soup, among them this already mentioned mushroom soup. If you enter a Polish restaurant, bar, or just a supermarket, you may find dozens of preparation or different kinds of the same soup. Quite popular, especially in summertime, are cold soups, especially, so it's cold soups, chłodny, cold soup, a soup that it's not only cold, it means it's boiled, it's prepared before and put it in the refrigerator, or in the old times they used a small pieces of ice put in the soup, very often with fresh vegetables. So anyway, a soup should open a traditional Polish meal, especially during Sunday or during some celebration. And we use this example, we follow this pattern with żurek. So in order to prepare żurek, you need especially this fermented rye. You may prepare it yourself at home, however it's a bit complicated, or rather quite simple, but you need at least 1 week or a bit more, and you need quite specific flour. You need flour on the or rye flour, quite big grain, quite rich and typical flour. It's easy to find in Poland, but actually people rather buy the already fermented liquid in the stores, and we use it for prepare the żurek, sour rye soup, and this fermented flavor of rye gives a very specific character to the soup. During hundreds of years, the soup was prepared without meat. It was quite poor, very modest. It was typical for Lent or different fasting days. But nowadays in Poland it's really a complex dish. It's really a full, complete meal, because the soup is prepared with meat and especially sausages, smoked sausages. During the year there are so typical smoked sausages that give this very specific flavor of something smoked, of smoke, so appreciated by Poles. But the special version prepared for Easter time, version opening the specific Eastern meal, is a so-called white sausage, so fresh sausage that is not smoked, that is prepared of the fresh meat, that is really spiced with marjoram, with some specific spices to give more flavor. But in this kind, if we use this white sausage, we should absolutely add smoked bacon to give this very important flavor of smoked food. So after chopping the sausages and bacon, you may fry it and put in this essence of rye, of fermented rye. There is many versions, and Tomasz Welter, a famous Polish cook, a member of Polish Chefs Association, grouping the famous Polish chefs, is proposing one of the version, quite simple but very delicious. So he prepare fried bacon with fried onion, adding a bit of flour in order to obtain something more thick. Then Polish sausages, in this case smoked sausages, chopped into small pieces in order to obtain really intense flavor of smoked meat, so strongly associated with festivity, with celebration, with a familial meal. So we can observe the work. It takes a bit of time, but in the same time we can state that he's really a master. For an ordinary cook, it could take much more time. So he already obtained a liquid from this fermented rye, melting the liquid with the sausage and onion, spicing it. In many Polish, so it's with marjoram. That it's really essential, but it gives a very specific meat. In many Polish families, the sour cream is added at the end. However, it's still this very, very rich, nutritious version. Very popular nowadays, but historically it was something much more modest. So we can see, so it's now, exactly now, when the fermented rye is added to this essence, to this broth. So there are many different kind of preparations. For professional cook, it's quite obvious that you got in your fridge already prepared broth, already prepared essence of vegetables and meat. But very often in Poland, you simply boil a sausage, especially this white sausage, spicing it quite generously, and you use this essence as a broth. Then you add this fermented rye, you add this fried bacon and sausage, especially white sausage. You add very often at the very end, even during the serving the meal, the eggs, and before the ending preparation you add very slowly, cautiously, the sour cream. However, the last thing, it's not really necessary because there are very different preparations. Actually, it's quite easy to find different kinds of recipes for more or less skilled cooks. Put just żurek or żurek, or try to find, for example, really useful internet site called culture.pl. Culture.pl it's a site of Polish Ministry for Foreign Affairs, and they developed a very good, very interesting branch of cuisine with recipes, with photos, with history, with general presentation. In the meantime, Tomasz prepared our żurek, and as a professional cook, he also is very cautious about the visual part of his preparation. In Poland, it's served with eggs, with hard-boiled eggs. Very often eggs serve as a kind of ornament. So it may be eaten with potatoes. So you put just very small pieces of potatoes, sliced, chopped potatoes at the end of, also rather not at the end of boiling, because the acid fermented rye makes that it's difficult to boil vegetables. If you want to add vegetables, you must absolutely add them before joining the liquid with fermented rye, because acid things makes the action of boiling really difficult, or it's very slow. So it was żurek, the first part of our culinary story, the first serving of our typical or exemplary meal, and we would like propose you in a moment the second dish, the meat rolls prepared on the basis of different meats, very popular, very typical for Polish cuisine. After eating żurek with sausage, with bacon, eggs, with some vegetables, after eating this rich plate zrazy, so rolled, filled meat with kasha, exactly saying buckwheat in this case, with mushrooms and red beets, we may be really well eaten food. But it's an example. It's an example of this rich, quite actually a bit exceptional Polish cuisine. In this traditional cuisine, they were rather, in these versions, a part of celebrations, of festivity, or a rich food that was really quite necessary for a farmer, for someone working very hard in the fields, someone who had to be strong, physically strong person. So this farmer should be eaten really well. However, it was not always possible to eat meat every day. Nowadays, due to a bit another idea of health, due to the fact that we are very often overeaten, due to the fact that we try to limit the take of meal consumed, due to the fact that vegan cuisine is more and more popular, we would like to propose you something lighter, something really simple, a kind of vegan and really fast, but in this good sense, possible to be prepared fast dish, a rice with vegetables. Maybe the most typical student food all over the world. It may be prepared in really quite simple way. You choose some vegetables, in this kind a broccoli, You fry it with onion, or in this case with garlic. You use something to replace a cream or milk, in this case cocoa milk, and you mix it with rice, with boiled rice. It's really easy to follow, it's really easy to observe the work of our cooks. So once again, rice, garlic, a bit of onion, this cocoa milk. It's easy to follow and imitate the work of our cooks. The next part of our culinary presentation, of our lesson of Polish cuisine, is rolled meat called zrazy. It may be prepared on the basis of different kinds of meat, especially beef, what was traditionally rather most typical, most appreciated. But last times, nowadays it's very often prepared on the basis of pork, that it's nowadays more popular in Poland. But if you like, you may prepare it also using chicken meat, or sometimes, however, it's very rare actually, even fish. So the idea consists in the fact that you prepare carefully a good piece of meat, that you roll it, filling it with different flavoring ingredients. So serving it in sauce, combining it with some vegetables or rather grain, famous Polish kasha, so a dish prepared on the basis of boiled grain, you may obtain quite sophisticated, quite original meal. So we start our preparation. The first thing, you have to decide what kind of meat you use. In our case, it's a pork, as much more popular nowadays. It's so the filling is very, very important. So you have to decide what you put inside the rolled meat. So very often it's bacon. Very often it's fermented cucumber. Quite often it's rye black bread. You serve it with kasha. So in this case, our cook Tomasz decided to use a buckwheat, a kind of kasha, a kind of grain still known in some countries, especially Eastern Europe, but it may be also barley, kasha, barley grain, or millet grain, or another kind of kasha. Of course, you need onion, green parsley, oil, because it should be fried before being braised. So you, at the beginning, you have chopped the bacon. Once again, quite useful skill for everyone wanting to discover Polish cuisine, because it repeats quite often. The same it was with żurek, if you remember. And then you have to chop an onion. You can observe that our chef is doing this work quite slowly, but rather it's just for demonstration, because for master of cookery it's very simple and really mastered skill. Then he chopped the fermented cucumber, melting it together, spicing with pepper, adding some cumin. You may spice it a bit as you like. You mix carefully the ingredients, because the flavor should be really in some way unique. Mixing the ingredients, and you prepare the meat. So an essential part of the meal. You should slice carefully the meat in quite thin slices, but you have to obtain quite bit surface of meat, because remember, your task consists in shaping the meat rolls and in filling it. We've already prepared filling, so it may be a bit difficult. So you have to obtain a bigger surface, like this. So you need a specific tool, a kind of hammer, very often traditionally made of wood, nowadays very often of plastic, but you have to be really cautious, because you have to obtain a big surface of meat, but you cannot damage it. So after preparing these essential ingredients, so beaten slices of meat and filling, you have to put them together. You have to fill the pieces of meat with our filling. That may differ a little, but some basic ingredients are, like in this case, cucumbers, so pickled cucumbers, and bacon, but you may add some other vegetables, some other thing. And then you have very carefully roll the meat. It may be, especially at the beginning, a bit difficult, but exercising is mastering. So you may observe how Tomasz, how our chef, prepare next pieces of meat. You have to repeat it many times for preparing as much of zrazy. I remind you, zrazy, it's the proper popular name of Polish dish. So as I already mentioned, very popular ingredient of Polish cuisines are forest wild mushrooms, and they go very well, especially with zrazy, sometimes use it as a part of this filling, and kasha, and this grain side dish served especially with kasha. So our cooks prepared very quickly the mushrooms, frying them on the oil, on the fried onions, adding chopped mushrooms, then adding a bit of broth. Sometimes it's serving a side, and sometimes it's boiled with kasha or another ingredients, giving a very specific, rich flavor and a kind of sauce. Very popular vegetable in Polish cuisine are beets, red beets. I already mentioned borscht, very popular soup, or rather different soups made on the basis of red beets, but it's also used very often as a salad or as a side dish. And once again, red beets are believed to go very well, especially with zrazy. So braised, rolled, once again, what does it mean, zrazy? Because still there are rather a beginning of preparation. Zrazy are filled rolled meat, braised in the sauce, and served with kasha, and very often with beetroots. You may prepare them as a separated side dish, but here our cooks mix many ingredients together in order to obtain. It's a kind of comfort food. When you put together kasha, different vegetables, or even meat, you may prepare a one-pot dish. And maybe the most difficult part, the decisive moment of our lesson, filled, rolled zrazy are fried in the fat, in this case in the oil, and you have to be really very careful and move them very carefully. So very often we may use some sticks to put the zrazy together, so our master doesn't need any help shaping meat in a very skilled way, but you have really help yourself with some small sticks. You have to fry it in quite strong fire quite quickly. Then the side dish is already prepared. Don't be mistaken with the fast work of our cooks. They are professional. They work together. They are masters. But really, if you observe their work, you can use some ideas. For example, that you just fry the meat. However, very often we braise the fried meat in the sauce. Here it seems that they added a bit of water, of broth to the oil. Anyway, braising it for a moment is very important, because frying rolled meat, you risk to obtain you risk to that it would be fried not enough time. Anyway, you obtain really splendid, famous Polish dish, zrazy, so rolled meat, beef, or nowadays quite often pork, served with kasha, served with mushrooms, wild forest mushrooms, and boiled, it's very important, boiled bits, in this case mixed together. So, good appetite. Like in many other countries, a good full meal should be ended by a dessert, by a cake, sweets, fruit, by shortly saying once again dessert. Polish cuisine is famous. It's also specialized in different kinds of cakes and house-made pastries. There are specific preparations for different celebrations, like for example mazurek, a kind of hard cake covered with chocolate or very often with nuts, raisins, almonds, served specifically for Easter time. Poles love the poppy seeds, and there is a specific kind of cake called makowiec. It means a cake with poppy seeds. And then you put a big amount of poppy seeds flavored with almond, very often with raisins. Then the cake, the leavened cake with yeast, is baked in the oven. Very often is prepared for Christmas. Maybe the most popular Polish cakes are cheesecake, a bit different than cheesecakes in other countries, made on the basis of fresh white cheese, a bit flavored, and this big quantity of cheese, because the cake itself is composed mainly of this cheese, with some sweets, once again raisins. And there are different types of cheesecake. It's very popular, maybe the most popular in the restaurants as a dessert, with an apple cake. An apple cake is an example of the use of Polish speciality of an apple. And we would like to show you an example of using apple jam in the cuisine as a dessert. So our chefs, Tomasz and Łukasz, will propose us a kind of dessert, a kind of pastry prepared from the leavened dough and filled with apple. In order to prepare it, you need, of course, the flour for the dough, the yeast, because you have to prepare leavened dough. Then, of course, obviously apples or apple jam sometimes, eggs, cream. Very often we use cinnamon. In this case, also in this case, for slicing the apples. Apples are very important product of Polish agriculture. We are the biggest producer in Europe, one of the biggest producers and exporters in the world. And during hundreds of years, Polish cooks, Polish housewives elaborated really very nice, very tasty ideas how to use apples in our kitchen. A Excepting this apple cake I mentioned before a moment, this kind of pastry, it's sometimes called pieróg, pierożek, however, is completely different from the Polish dumplings that they are boiled in the water. However, you can prepare classical dumplings filled with apples also. It's also quite popular. In this case, if someone is at least a bit familiar with baking, it seems to be simple. So you have to prepare a dough, mix it with the yeast, and you have wait until the dough will leaven a bit like for a dough for pizza. It should be light, it should be filled with air. So you may just follow the work of our cooks. After preparing the dough, you fill it with apples, or rather with a kind of freshly prepared jam. Apples with a bit of cream, with a big portion of cinnamon. You may sweet this filling rather with honey, another famous Polish product, than sugar. And combining the sweetness of honey with acidity of the apple and spice and spicy flavor of the cinnamon, filling obtained dough, baking it in the oven, you may obtain a really delicious dessert, especially if eaten as a fresh bakery. But if you think it's really too difficult for you, you may easily find pasties filled with apples, apple jam, or another fruit in literally every Polish cafe or store. We have just presented to you an example of Polish meal. Quite exemplary, but in some time exceptional. Because you may use just one of proposed dishes in order to prepare whole meal for you. It's really very rich, very nutritious. It was rather a kind of demonstration to introduce you to the world of Polish cuisine. As I said at the very beginning, cuisine is a part of culture. Some typical products, so apples are known everywhere, but somewhere they are more appreciated, they are more often used in the cuisine, and the products are more elaborated or used for very, very different things. Soups are known also in every cuisine of the world. But these rich, nutritious soups, prepared cautiously as the main or unique part of the meal, are very specific trait of Polish cuisine. This love for mushrooms, wild mushrooms and different forest products, this love for acid taste, this preference for smoked meats, especially sausage, are something typical, something exceptional, especially if joined together, especially if you combined it with a specific seasonal calendar, with different rituals, customs coming from history and religion, like Easter and Christmas, especially Christmas Eve, or just rediscover it, just reintroduce it, the custom of preparing goose for St. Martin Day, 11 November, that is the national celebration, the Day of Independence. It gives you a way to discover the country. You may follow it using different internet sites, especially culture.pl, just mentioned it, an official site of Polish Ministry for Foreign Affairs, with very good, very well written culinary part, not only practical recipes, practical advices, but also with some cultural introduction, showing what does it mean, Polish food, regional food, healthy food, or comfort food in Poland nowadays.